Within the north of Middle-earth there was a realm full of hardy men known as the Kingdom of Dale. Although not as prominent as the Riders of Rohan or Soldiers of Gondor, it nevertheless earned an honoured place in the history of the realm. During the War of the Ring, it was the men of Dale and their Dwarven allies that prevented Sauron's Easterlings from linking up with Dol Guldur and pressing into Mirkwood and Lothlorien. Had this rendezvous come to pass, it would have enabled Mordor to flank Gondor and Rohan from the north and rear, and perhaps bring about an end to the Age of Men. Yet be it orc, man or dragon, the northern armies of Bardings and Lakemen showcased the resilience and valour of Northmen. Just like their southern cousins, they too proved to be a bulwark of the west against the encroaching shadows of the east. Welcome to our latest video on the militaries of Middle-earth, in which we will cover the history of the Men of Dale and Lake Town. It is unknown when exactly Dale saw its first settlers, but the region seems not to have become a major settlement until sometime during the Third Age, when humans began migrating there due to its proximity to the wealthy Dwarven kingdom of Erebor. In TA 2590, King Thror of the Dwarves re-established the Dwarven kingdom of Erebor, and it was said that Thror and his folk prospered and became rich, and they had the friendship of all men that dwelt near, for they made not only things of wonder and beauty, but weapons and armour of great worth, and there was great traffic of ore between them and their kin in the Iron Hills. Thus, the Northmen who lived between Celduin and Canaan became strong and drove back all enemies from the east. The Northmen gradually settled the lands up the River Running and built their capital of Dale. The men of Dale traded foodstuffs with the dwarves of Erebor in return for Dwarven metallurgy. The men of Dale paid handsomely to have their sons apprentice under the dwarves, and soon its people became renowned for their bells and magical toys. Dale was governed by a succession of lords, the last and most prominent of which being Lord Girion, who oversaw Dale's zenith. At one point, Girion traded his prized necklace, made of 500 emeralds, for a coat of Dwarven-linked rings wrought of pure silver, with the strength of triple steel. This showcased how wealthy and powerful Dale had become. The prosperity of the region led to the co-development of a sister city to Dale known as Esgaroth, or Lake Town. It was constructed entirely of wood, standing upon pillars on Long Lake. Its inhabitants, known as Lakemen, also built huts and small buildings along the shoreline, where they kept large pastures for cattle. Lake Town was well defended. Its long wooden bridge had gates and hut outposts garrisoned with guards. Lake Town began navigating the riverways, establishing new trade routes far and wide. While Erebor traded primarily with Dale, Lake Town began trade with the elves of the Woodland Realm. The Lakemen traded foodstuff and drink, and presumably King Thranduil of the Elves traded back gold acquired from his river tolls. The trade resulted in a large marketplace being formed around a central pool, with waterways for boats to bring goods back and forth. This created a vast commercial network between Erebor, the Iron Hills, Dale, Lake Town, the Woodland Realm, and nearby populations, increasing the wealth and prosperity of all. Lake Town was governed by a master, who was elected amongst the oldest and wisest of the waterborne settlement's population. Lake Town was defended by a force of guards led by a captain who served the Master of Lake Town. While Lake Town was an inalienable part of the Kingdom of Dale, it was politically autonomous and largely handled its own affairs. News of the prosperity of Erebor and Dale spread far and wide, unfortunately reaching the ears of the great fire-breathing dragon Smaug. Like a hurricane coming from the north, Smaug attacked Erebor and Dale, setting everything on fire. Dwarven warriors were slain at the front gate of Erebor, before Smaug turned upon the warriors of Dale, who were led by Girion. The defenders of Dale perished as their citizens fled for the safety of Lake Town, including the wife and child of Girion. Henceforth, Smaug took up residence in Erebor upon his hoarded treasure, coming out at night to seize the people of Dale to eat. Dale was thus abandoned completely and fell to ruins. Having lost trade with Dale and Erebor, Lake Town now relied upon trade with the elves of the Woodland Realm to make ends meet. The people of Lake Town were safe for a while. That was until the arrival of Thorin's company, whose antics brought the wrath of Smaug upon them. While the master of Lake Town fled in fear, it was Bard, a descendant of Girion, who led the Lakemen against the dragon. Bard ordered the bridges to be cut, and took command of a company of archers. He carried with him an heirloom of the Lords of Dale, the Black Arrow, once forged in Erebor. Bard shot the arrow at a small chink in the scales of Smaug's left chest, hitting his heart and killing him. At least 3/4 of the lake men survived the ordeal, taking their boats to the lakeshore. Henceforth they praised their saviour as Bard the Bowman, and called for him to be their new king. However, the Master of Laketown argued that the Lords of Dale had never ruled Laketown, and that they had always chosen amongst themselves who their leader should be. Instead, he suggested that Bard reclaim the Kingdom of Dale. Bard responded that he still served under the Master of Laketown, and would consider said actions on a later date, for they all had much more pressing concerns. After the desolation of Smaug, Laketown was in ruins, her populace was now homeless, and word had spread that the treasure hoard of Smaug lay unguarded. Bard sent word to King Thranduil for aid, and the Woodland Realm promptly sent supplies downriver. However, Thranduil also came with his army, eager to claim some of the treasure. Together, Thranduil's elven armies and Bard's militiamen marched to Erebor, believing Thorin's company was certainly dead. To their surprise, Thorin's company was very much alive and had fortified Erebor. Bard pleaded for some of the treasure to aid his weary people. Thranduil supported his claims, but Thorin would not spare a single coin. Instead, Thorin called for aid from Dain Ironfoot, who brought an army of Iron Hill dwarves. Soon the three armies came to heated blows. On the Elvish side were 1,000 highly competent and peerless elven spearmen and swordsmen, supported by some 500 archers, and accompanied by 300 militiamen of Laketown, led by Thranduil and Bard respectively. A battle almost ensued between both companies had it not been for the intervention of Gandalf, who informed them that innumerable hordes of goblins, led by Bolg, were now marching directly towards them, incited by previous hatreds alongside the slaying of the Great Goblin. Dain, Thranduil and Bard agreed that the oncoming host of orcs, wargs and bats, which outnumbered them massively, should be their core concern. The generals lined their forces at the spurs of the mountain, with the dwarves and men on the left and the elves on the right. A light rearguard was placed in between these two forces in order to entice the orcs to attack, allowing them to be encircled and destroyed. Bilbo attempted to sit out the battle on the elven-held Ravenhill, where he was accompanied by Gandalf. The fighting ensued as the orcs and wargs crashed forward, with the bats supporting them like a sea of locusts. Initially, the allied plan worked perfectly, as the enemy vanguard rushed to the choke point in the centre, taking massive losses. However, the sheer weight of numbers ensured this advantage was not held for long on the part of the allied forces. The second wave was far worse, with orcs scaling the sides of the spurs to attack the free folk from the side and rear, while the main wave engaged them from their initial starting point. The allies were hard pressed and were barely surviving the onslaught, and it seemed that the battle would soon be over. It was at this point a great shout went up from the lonely mountain. Thorin Oakenshield finally realized the folly of his ways and crashed forwards with his fellow companions. Their emergence upon the battlefield inspired the free folk. Their charge was so unexpected, and the weapons and armor uncovered within Erebor so effective, that the company pushed its way through the entirety of the Orcish centre, rallying their faltering allies as they passed. Here, they eventually reached the monumentally sized bodyguards of Bolg, through whom they could not force their way. Battle lines and tactics soon devolved into an unorganized and chaotic melee, with no quarter being given on either side, and it seemed as if a stalemate had ensued, which would ultimately favour the orcs, who outnumbered the valorous of the dwarves, men and elves who stood together on that day. It was at this point Bilbo let out the cry, "The eagles are coming." Indeed, the Lord of the Great Eagles, Gwaihir, had led hundreds of his kind to aid the free folk in their desperate conflict, just as the tide had begun to turn against them. This shout was taken up by the entirety of the allied force, before Bilbo was unfortunately knocked unconscious by a stray rock to the head. The battle began to swing finally in favour of the free folk, as the eagles decimated the Orcish lines in swooping manoeuvres, relieving much of the pressure placed upon both spurs and Thorin in the centre. However, the engagement, that would later be called the Battle of the Five Armies, was truly won when Bjorn arrived in his form of a bear of gargantuan size and crashed into the goblin kind. Just at this point, Thorin attempted to break through and slay Bolg, but was mortally wounded in the attempt. Bjorn, seeing this, brushed through the Orcish lines in order to carry Thorin's broken body to safety. Seeing the wounded king under the mountain and further enraged by it, Bjorn returned to the fray, filled with wrath and seeking vengeance. He smashed the ranks of Bolg's bodyguards before slaying the mighty orc himself in single combat, destroying the morale of the orcs, who were left as easy pickings for the battered but unbroken free folk to decimate. Panicking and scattering, they were slaughtered en masse, with many more losing their lives in Mirkwood as Thranduil's people showed them no mercy. The victors divided the treasure, with Bard taking Bilbo's 14th share, sharing it with the Master of Laketown, and giving Thranduil the Emeralds of Girion. However, the greedy Master of Laketown fled with much of the gold before starving to death in the waste. Because the Lakemen feared to go near the dead body of Smaug, they rebuilt Laketown north of its original location. The new Master of Laketown was wiser and more popular than his treacherous predecessor. Meanwhile, many Lakemen followed Bard to rebuild Dale. Bard I became the first king of the re-established Kingdom of Dale in TA 2944. Like its predecessor, the new Dale benefited from the refounding of Erebor. Prosperity had returned, and Northmen from the south and west came to Dale, tilling its valley again. Henceforth, the people of Dale became known as Bardings. Bard I was succeeded by his son Bane in TA 2977, who was succeeded by his son Brand in TA 3007. Under their rule, Dale had expanded far south and east of Laketown, spanning between the Kelduin and Carnan rivers. The old trade network between Erebor, the Iron Hills, Dale, Laketown, and the Woodland Realm was re-established. J.R.R. Tolkien based Laketown on Neolithic pile dwellings discovered near the Alps during the 19th century, while Dale was something akin to a typical Nordic town found in northern Europe during the Viking Age. The language spoken by the Bardings and Lakemen was Dalian, and their written language used runes, invoking parallels between it and the Old Nordic language. Given how the Rohirrim were greatly influenced by Anglo-Saxon culture, one can presume the men of Dale were inspired by their Scandinavian Germanic cousins. Both Dale and Laketown seem to blend Scandinavian and Icelandic mythology, and are quite reminiscent of old Viking trading towns. Tolkien took much inspiration from the Old English poem of Beowulf, and according to Tolkien scholar John D. Rateliff, Bard the Bowman was likely inspired by the Nordic folk hero Wiglaf. Both characters are introduced late into their respective stories, were of royal lineage, and courageously faced a dragon. This gives further credence to the Scandinavian influence of Dale. Culturally, we know only the prosperity of Dale and Laketown led them to be so comfortable they cherished toys. Given the colder northern climate, they most likely lived much like the Scandinavians of the early Middle Ages did. There was a social hierarchy present in Laketown, in which wealthier families lived in great houses around the marketplace, and the Master of Laketown resided in the largest great house where he held feasts. They fished, cultivated land, and raised cattle to feed themselves and trade. Both the men of Dale and Lakemen baked cram, a biscuit-like substance whose recipe was given to them by the dwarves of Erebor. It is said to be nutritious and used to sustain men for long journeys, similar to elven lembas bread. It was, however, a flavourless and uninspiring food. Dale and Laketown wielded what weapons they could craft, but also traded with and were armed by the dwarves of Erebor. When Thorin's company came upon the horde of Smaug, they found spears made for the great King Bledothin, each holding a head thrice forged, with shafts inlaid with gold. In addition, they found shields and two-handed hammers carved with birds and flowers, whose eyes and petals were made of jewels. They also uncovered coats of mail that were gilded, silvered, and impenetrable, presumably made of mithril. By the time of the War of the Ring, many of the weapons and armor of Smaug's horde would have been traded to the Bardings. During the Council of Elrond, Gloin told Frodo about their great labours between Dale and Erebor. "We have done well, but in metalwork we cannot rival our fathers, many of whose secrets are lost. We make good armor and keen swords, but we cannot make again mail or blade to match those that were made before the dragon came. Only in mining and building have we surpassed the old days." Despite the craftsmanship of Erebor declining, their weapons and armour would still have been some of the best found in Middle-earth, and given willingly to the Bardings during times of war. Thus it can be expected that some of the wealthier Bardings and Lakemen would be armed with Dwarven-crafted armour, helms, shields, swords, spears, knives, axes, hammers and so forth. Bard wielded a great yew bow, so it can be surmised that the Bardings and Lakemen also used longbows. Given that the Black Arrow was forged in Erebor, the Dwarves may also have provided munitions for the longbows. In TA 3017, Mordor sent messengers to Kings Dain II and Brand, espousing Sauron's friendship. Sauron's requests were rebuffed, and it was discovered that a great host of Sauron's forces, including many Easterlings, were assembling on the eastern borders of Dale. Dain II and Brand prepared their peoples as best they could. War would come first to Dale, however, as on the 17th of March TA 3019, the massive Easterling host crossed the borders of the kingdom, intending to invade and capture the city. The Easterlings were mainly composed of well-equipped and well-drilled warriors from Rhûn, surprising the forces of Dale and the Lonely Mountain with the speed at which they crossed the Redwater River, given their numbers. Kings Brand and Dain II quickly assembled their forces, and it could be estimated that there were 2,500 dwarves of Erebor and of the Iron Hills, alongside 3,500 men of Dale, compared to that of the 20,000 strong force of Easterlings. This assault coincided with the siege of Minas Tirith in order to prevent any aid coming to Gondor from the north, tying down these forces in a manner Saruman was unable to achieve with the Riders of Rohan. The two kings met the Easterlings in open battle on the same day the Easterlings crossed the river, hoping to prevent the destruction of Dale, putting their faith in the fact that the foundries of Erebor gave them a massive advantage in terms of their arms and armour. 3 days of heavy fighting ensued, wherein the steadfastness of the dwarves and men of Dale was eventually eroded by the numerical advantage possessed by the men of Rhûn, forcing them to retreat. Seeing that Lake Town would be indefensible, the combined force of men and dwarves attempted to retreat behind the impregnable gates of the Lonely Mountain, with Kings Brand and Dain leading a desperate rearguard action. The two kings managed to buy enough time for their forces to fall back into the mountains. However, Brand was struck down by an Easterling's blade before the gate of the Lonely Mountain. Dain, enraged by the death of his close friend and ally, stood over Brand's corpse and refused to give an inch despite the intense pressure exerted by the far more numerous Easterling force. After a prolonged defense of the King of Dale's body, the Dwarven King under the mountain was also slain, despite the piles of Easterling casualties that mounted around the stalwart king. The forces of the deceased leaders then locked the gates of the mountain and prepared for a prolonged siege. While the men of Dale and dwarves of Erebor and the Iron Hills remained besieged behind the gates of the Lonely Mountain, their primary hope for victory lay with the men of the West, led by the soon-to-be King of Gondor, Aragorn. The army of Dale during the War of the Ring would have consisted of both Bardings and Lakemen. The King of Dale and the Master of Laketown likely acted as supreme commanders, with the King of Dale being Commander-in-Chief and the Master of Laketown serving as Deputy Commander-in-Chief. It is known that Laketown had a Captain of the Guard, indicating a form of professional armed forces. One would presume Dale had its own guard force as well. Like their cousins, the Rohirrim, and their ancestors, the Northmen of Rhovanion, the Bardings and Lakemen's primary historical enemies were the Easterlings, against whom they had to defend themselves routinely. During the War of the Ring, both Rohan and Dale successfully kept the Easterlings at bay. Given that the Kingdom of Dale had roughly half the territory of Rohan, it can be surmised that it was capable of rallying half the force Rohan could. During the War of the Ring, Rohan could have theoretically mustered 20,000 riders, so simple division concludes that Dale could summon a force of 10,000 men. Dale and Laketown would likely have had a feudal military system, in which local lords supplied most of the army, while the king and master oversaw a small corps of professional troops. The majority of warriors would be militiamen who were not heavily armed, while the elite guards and professional troops would have been donned in high-quality dwarven craft and fought as something akin to heavy infantry. Meanwhile, the militiamen would have relied primarily upon the bow and a cheaply crafted melee weapon. Given that Dale and Laketown have a strong Nordic influence, it is reasonable to deduce they favoured axes with round shields as their melee weaponry. Within his legendarium, Tolkien wrote much about tight shoulder-to-shoulder formations, such as the Gondolindrim Phalanx, Númenórean Thangale, and Rohirrim Shield Wall. It's reasonable to deduce that the Bardings and Lakemen performed something akin to the Nordic Fylking formation. As for unit specialization, the backbone of the army would be archers. Bard the Bowman commanded a company of archers during the desolation of Smaug, and given the terrain of Laketown, they likely relied primarily on archers. Living atop a large lake naturally prompted the Lakemen to build an armada of small vessels for trade, and this lent itself to the formation of riverine units. These mariner warriors could assail their enemies with missiles or perform daring amphibious assaults when necessary. These naval units likely proved essential in fending off Easterling incursions. Being of Northmen descent, the Bardings and Lakemen plausibly fought as horseback archers. Since the First Age, when men and dwarves formed alliances against the orcs, men typically acted as mounted scouts and archers to complement the dwarves' heavy infantry. Thus, it is easy to believe Dale and Laketown would have contingents of archer cavalry. Rising above their humble origins, modest size, and resources compared to the grand armies of elves, dwarves, and Dunedain, the Northmen of Dale and Laketown proved themselves resilient, hardy, and courageous people. Through their valor, Tolkien emphasizes that heroism is not exclusive to the mighty or immortal, but also found in the hearts of everyday individuals fighting for home and family. More videos on the societies of Middle-earth are on the way. But in the meantime, we are planning to cover the battles of many other fantasy, sci-fi, and space opera universes, so make sure you have subscribed and pressed the bell button. Please consider liking and sharing as it helps immensely, and don't forget to comment. We will try to read and respond to every comment, as we want to know what you think about this video and which videos you hope to see in the future. This is the Wizards and Warriors channel, and we'll catch you on the next one.